Hello, everyone. Sorry, I am not quite as punctual as usual. I was this close to restarting my computer before I started, so you'll probably have just a little bit of me talking to my computer and complaining a bit. Thank you to everyone who has joined so far, and I'm just looking at all of your amazing comments. I'm not going to look at them straight away because I'm going to give you a little preamble here. So today we are talking about still life and flower portraiture. Now, the reason that I wanted to kind of combine these is because flowers aren't everyone's bag. I thought not everyone's going to be interested in a bunch of pictures of flowers. So let's do a combination of the two. Before I forget, if you are not a subscriber, please subscribe. You just have to hit the subscribe button. Do like the channel as well, because why not? And hit the bell icon so that you get notified when we go live and do our streams. And also, don't forget that we have a coffee fund. It is very soon probably going to become a Get Becky a New Computer fund at the rate I'm going. No, it's not really. It's still a coffee fund. But please do contribute to it if you're happy to. Super Chat is the way to do that using the little dollar sign. Or you can do it, if you're not watching this live, you can do it afterwards using our PayPal link. Right, that's that. Now on to the important stuff. Everything is in sync and seems to be so far working fine, apart from the weather. The weather is not working. We need to reboot that because that's horrid. It's cold and I'm freezing. My mum is fine, David. Hello, David. David is a childhood friend of my mother's. There's a bit of trivia for you. I will tell her that you were on my live stream. She will love that. All right, so still life and portraiture of plants and flowers and things like that. That's kind of what we're going to go over today. Some of this stuff I've covered a little bit in other streams, but we're kind of going to take all of that and combine it into one topic. So the difference between flower portraiture and what people might refer to as macro photography, they are two different things. Macro does specifically mean close up, and actually, by definition, means making something look life-size. Micro photography is specifically reproducing a subject one-to-one on the sensor, and I talked about that a couple of streams ago about micro versus macro and what macro lenses do. So essentially, they project the image of the subject life-size, so one-to-one, onto the sensor. Whereas portraiture of flowers and things like that is a little bit different. It's not as scientific as macro, and it doesn't have to be, and you don't have to have a macro lens to do it. So although I'm a big fan of always telling everyone to have a macro lens or have access to it, you don't necessarily need to. And I'm going to kind of talk about different lenses and also different lighting and things like that. So for kind of flowers and insects and things, we normally think macro, but you can shoot these kind of things, not calling it macro, calling it close-up or calling it flower portraiture or something like that with different lenses. Whereas still life, which is its own topic, has its own technology, has its own form of lighting, and kind of different principles. Now, if you saw the composition stream that I did the other day, I am going to talk a little bit about that, but you'll see in the examples that I show you where it plays by the rules and where it doesn't, and where people have violated it, but it works anyway. Flower portraiture, I personally tend to kind of fill the frame with my subject. I like to have the center of a flower just completely filling the frame. That doesn't abide by any rules of third or anything. It doesn't abide by those rules. So we know how to stick to the rules and we know how to break them. We'll probably be doing a little bit of that today. So let's talk about lenses. Now I have somewhere, I don't want to show you my desk. It is an absolute nightmare here. I brought all of my equipment. It was scattered around my house. I think my husband thinks that my cameras are breeding because every time he turns around, there's a new camera lying around. They're actually all the same cameras. I just seem to have them scattered all over the place. So I have this one, which is the 60mm 2.8G. There is a previous version of this, which some of you may be familiar with. It has an aperture ring. And there's an earlier version still which has an aperture ring but is just slightly older. I talked about the differences between the AF and AFD lenses quite early on in our streaming. So if you don't know the differences, check one of those early streams out. But essentially, if you don't have the aperturing on your lens, then it's more than likely going to be an AFS-G type lens, as Nikon fancily call the Genesis lenses, or as Ken Rockwell, who can be quite acerbic about these things, calls the gelded lenses. That's not actually what they mean, but anyway, he doesn't like them that much. So this is a silent wave motor lens, which means that the autofocus is driven by the lens and also in combination with the camera, whereas with those older lenses which have the aperturing, your body is driving the autofocus. That means if you've got a little camera, like let's try not to knock everything over on my desk while I do this. If you've got a little camera like this 5100 here, or 3000 series camera, if you've got a lens with an aperturing, it won't autofocus. The camera doesn't have a motor to drive it. But if you've got a bigger camera like a 7000 series or a D800 series, any of those things, those will autofocus with the older lenses or the newer lenses. I don't actually have any D lenses to show you, which is why I keep parading this one around. Hello, David. That's all right. You've been out with your camera. You're forgiven for being late. So this is the macro lens I tend to use. This is 1-to-1 reproduction, as is the 105 macro, which you might be familiar with. And also, if you're using a DX camera, you've got the 40mm and the 85mm. Those are DX specialist lenses. So they're just designed for that crop sensor, really. Those are all 1-to-1. There is also a 200 f4 micro, which is a wonderful lens, but unfortunately was discontinued by Nikon, sadly, a few months ago. So those are all the macro lenses which, when you take a picture of your subject, you get that 1-to-1 reproduction, which I talked about quite a lot in a stream a few weeks ago. It might have been longer than that, honestly, I don't remember. I don't remember what week it is. What week are we on now? 7, 8? It's awful. So, you don't have to use a macro lens. I'm going to show you some examples using other lenses. I, personally, am a big fan of taking the widest lens I can. This is a 20mm, 1.8. And I also have this little sneak peek here for you. This is a 1.8 Z lens. You see the difference in size there? So they're both 77mm diameter on the front, I believe. I'm pretty sure I checked that. Yeah, they are. But this lens is massive, and it's actually heavier than the 21.8G. So I went and took this out for a little play on the Z6 a few days ago, and I posted some of my results on Instagram, which you will have seen. I am always a stickler for grabbing any lens I can and getting as close as possible to the subject. So it doesn't really matter if you're doing flower portraiture or still life or anything where you want to get close to the subject. It doesn't really matter what lens you use, as long as you understand the differences and the ability that you have to get closer to the subject and blur out the background, because you can do it with a lens that doesn't have a super wide aperture. And I'm going to show you some examples in just a moment. So the 20mm could also be used for this kind of stuff. Some people like to use a fancy term for wide-angle lenses and getting close to a subject called environmental portraiture, where the subject kind of mostly fills the frame, but you do still have quite a lot of background in there. The 1.8 lenses, or lenses with a wide aperture, are perfect for that kind of thing, because you can stop down quite a lot and then get a very, very nice shallow depth of field. Another lens unconventionally used for close-ups, which I'm going to show you some examples of again in a minute, is a 500 PF. I'm not just grabbing every lens out of my collection, but I have pretty much used every lens that I have for this kind of photography, because although a lot of people pick landscapes, or they pick portraiture, or sports or wildlife, I tend to be the kind of person that just gets very, very close to things, whether it's flowers or, bits of architecture and stuff. That's the kind of photography that I do a lot. So I do other stuff as well, but most of my lenses will get put to that purpose at some point or another. So I'm going to show you all of the examples now of that. So just to show you how, sorry you missed the start, Michael. So that's okay. We haven't talked that much yet. So just to show you, I'm going to get my pictures ready, because I've got some interesting examples. Now, all of these are unedited, so you'll have to forgive that they don't look maybe as pristine as they would once they go up on my Instagram. This is a picture of a little bush. Someone is going to tell me what it's called. I don't know. Taken outside my house. This is actually with a 35 1.4 lens, which practically lives on my D850. It's a lens that I use a lot. I love the way that it renders the background and the detail. So that's with a 35. This next shot, exactly the same flower, just a little bit later. This was taken with a 60mm 2.8G. Believe it or not, it's with the macro lens on an f6 shooting Kodak Portraiture. So exact same plant, but very different angle. I obviously wasn't as close as I could possibly be, but also you can see, and I'm going to talk about bokeh and how it changes from one lens to another in a minute, but you can see the difference in bokeh between that lens and that lens. That's got 35 1.4 has a very nice bokeh, but it's slightly less pleasing, I would say, than the 60 for certain situations. And then same plant, 500 PF, exactly the same location, slightly later because these little buds had actually come out by this time. But this is with the 500 PF, and then here's a shot that I actually cropped for Instagram, and it's so it's been kind of compressed a little bit, but that was a B, also taken with the 500 PF. So you can kind of see that you can use a wide angle or a mid to wide angle, a macro, or a telephoto for this kind of stuff. You don't have to own a macro lens for it to work. And just to explain the bokeh concept, so most of us know what that means. It's a Japanese word that refers to the points of out of focus light in a picture. So you get those little pleasing sort of blobs, if you like, of light. And if you're shooting with a lot of light source coming in through the back of your subject, you will see bokeh rendered in one way or another if you're using quite a wide aperture. Now, the thing that changes the quality of bokeh is partially the glass, but mostly is the shape of the aperture blades. So if you've got a lens which has quite a lot of blades, then it will give you a much smoother looking out of focus background. And let me see if I can show you. This is probably not the best lens to show you on, actually. Let me show you on my 50 1.2, just because you can see it quite clearly on this one. Let me hold that up. So you can see those aperture blades there. I think it's got, I'm trying to count them now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 blades. All right, now, so that's the aperture opening and closing. Now you see when the blades are kind of that shaped, you can see that it produces a septagon or whatever. I didn't actually count the exact number of blades, but it produces a geometric shape. Now with, let's say, my 60mm, which is slightly harder to see because it's right down there, it has way, way, way more blades. So when I open and close that aperture, it produces a much rounder looking hole. So when the light passes through it, you end up with a very different shape of bokeh between one lens to the other. There are other elements to it as well, the physical size of the lens and the length of the barrel and all kinds of things which actually do affect the way that the light passes through. I had for a long time the 35 1.8. It was for a long, long time one of my favorite go-to lenses. But the bokeh, if I was shooting close up, was quite, as some people call it, nervous looking. So rather than getting these nice little very defined out of focus points, you would get this kind of like it was vibrating with terror. That's why it's called nervous bokeh. And I just found it less than pleasing. So I ended up getting the 35 1.4 eventually. Took me a while to upgrade to that, but it makes a big difference when it comes to the out of focus highlights. It does look very, very different. And as I say, it's a lens that I use the majority of the time now when I go kind of doing walkabout stuff. So those are some examples for you. I'm just going to quickly check the comments because someone's going to tell me what the what the flowers. A flowering currant. I actually have a friend who is part of a kind of gardening group, and they know all these things. So whenever I send them stuff, they always tell me what it is. But I've kind of abused that a bit last week, so I didn't want to do it again. So here we go. Doesn't the bokeh change because of the number of iris blades? There we go. That's what I said, isn't it? Morning from Mexico. Hello, Ed. Long lenses like the 500 are great for flowers. Yes, exactly. And I wanted to also show you some examples of that, which I realize I haven't downloaded from the dry folder. So here we go. 200 f4 is a lovely, lovely lens. That's the macro lens. It is a beautiful lens. It's a real shame that Nikon discontinued that, unfortunately. But you can still pick them up. They're quite expensive in secondhand now because there's obviously a demand for them, but you can still pick them up. The 55 1.2 is a magical lens. I can't get enough of this lens. It's gorgeous. It mostly lives on my FM3A because I don't have a 35 on there. 60mm. Now, okay, so different people ask me what's better, the 60mm or the 105. Very much depends on your working distances and stuff like that. The 60mm gets super close. You can get, you know, a couple of inches away from your subject. The 105 is about a foot of in terms of closest focusing distance. So obviously if you're taking pictures of insects or butterflies, anything that is maybe a bit skittish and you don't want to get super close, because you do have to get very close with this one, then you might want to have a 105 for that sort of situation, or a 200. Whereas the 60mm is great if you do product photography or jewelry or food or flowers, things that aren't going to necessarily move. I did take some butterfly pictures. I think I've got one lined up in my sequence of shots for you, but that was quite heavily cropped with that because I didn't want to get too close to the butterfly. So if you've got D850, you can crop to your heart's content. If you've got a camera with lower resolution, you might not want to crop so much, so then you've got to work around the resolution by having more flexible lenses. So let me now just talk about using, I've got some other examples that I want to show you. The 105 let more light onto the subject. Yeah, I'm sure that it does actually, and there's science behind that, well, it's a bigger lens apart from anything. It's almost twice the size of this one in terms of physical barrel size. And it also has vibration reduction, which is helpful if you are hand holding. The 70 to 180. Yes, the 70 to 180, for those of you that don't know, was a zoom macro lens that Nikon produced in, I can't remember which decade, but it was a couple of decades ago. It is a lovely lens. It was the only zoom macro that they made. But in order to get one-to-one reproduction, like I was talking about at the beginning of the stream, you had to use a special filter with it called a 6T, which is a very special close-up filter designed specifically for the 70 to 180. It's great because it's a flexible lens, and there's no other zoom macros out there. Andy likes 300 2.8 for close-up. Yeah, so the 500, Simon Stafford actually sent me loads of photos using the 500 PF for macro, well, not macro, close-ups. Got to be a bit careful about what words I use there. And I don't think I've actually got them in the same folder as everything else, so I'll try and find them while I'm multitasking here. So those are the macro lenses. Now let me just show you another couple of examples. These are with the Zs, and this is my little sneak peek of the 20 lens as well. I've got so much stuff on my desk that I'm struggling to move my mouse, so beg your pardon for being so slow here. Right, so this is a shot of a bluebell, obligatory at this time of year. This was just taken with the standard kit 24 to 70 f4. Which is a fantastically sharp lens, actually. It's really, really good. Obviously, the bokeh is a bit weird on it, but it does, if you get the light right, it actually does produce these nice little sort of spots of light here. Now, in contrast, this is a slightly cropped picture with the 21.8 Z lens. Super close. You can get ridiculously close with this lens. Also a bluebell, different location, different day, different lighting, but also with the Z6. This one was also taken with the 21.8 Z, which actually is probably closer to the rendering of the 24 to 70 than this picture. But just looking at the way that the 21.8 has produced those spots of light is very, very satisfying, I would say. It's bubbly is the only word that I can use. Effervescent bokeh. I'm going to coin a few new terms here. I also just pulled out this shot. This is by Trevor Kerr-Lewis, who's a regular on the stream. This is in the dry folder, and I wanted to ask him what he used to take this shot of an alum. It's called an alum, I believe, plant. And I was just intrigued because of the way that the the flowers at the back here are out of focus, but he didn't have any settings marked in the drive folder. So Trevor, if you're watching, please let me know what you used to take that picture, because I wanted to use it as an example and I didn't have the information there and then. You might comment on it now if you're watching live. Okay, so extension rings on a Z6. So if you take a normal lens, not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a macro lens, but if you take a regular lens and you put on an extension ring, my extension tubes are on the other side of the room behind the green screen. So, but they look like the kind of like teleconverters, look like that. You put them on the back of a lens and they allow you to get closer to the subject. It actually just brings the closest focusing distance closer with an extension ring. Now, this is an extension ring or an extension tube is different to a teleconverter because, as I've talked about before, teleconverters actually allow you to reach further away, whereas extension tubes actually bring you closer to the subject. It does not affect the quality of your lens at all because there's no glass in them. They are quite literally a ring, a little bit like the FTZ. There's no element there. It's just it's a machined piece of metal, so it doesn't affect the quality. What it does is it changes the distance between the back of the lens and the sensor, so you end up being able to get slightly closer to your subject, so you don't have to worry about quality. If you're using teleconverters, that's a different thing because they have glass in them and they actually magnify the glass of the lens. The problem with that is that if the teleconverters aren't very good, then you will end up with slightly less than satisfactory images. I've got a TC 1.4 also in my camera bag on the other side of the room. I didn't think I was going to be talking about that today, so you know, just threw me a little curve there. 105 is a great multi-use lens. Yes, thank you, Sharif. I agree with that. I actually use the 60mm also for portraiture. It depends. Different people are different on what they want to use their lenses for. I prefer portraiture with wider lenses like the 50s and the 60s and the 85s. I love the 105 lens, but I don't use it that often, whereas other people prefer sort of 105 or 135, or even the 70 to 200 is a great lens for portraiture. So you can double them up. They're not just macro lenses for sure. 70 to 200 f4 with the TC 1.4, it's not. So the thing is that when you use a teleconverter, as I said, you won't get closer to the subject. You will actually allow yourself to be further away from the subject, whereas an extension tube or a macro lens allows you to get closer to the subject. So they do two slightly different things. Nilo's talking about reversing a 50. That is a fantastic thing. I did an article on that in a Nikon Owner Mag a little while back, and I also talked about it in a stream very early on. I talked about reversing rings, where you actually take the lens and rather than putting it on the camera this way, you flip it round, you get a ring that you screw in the front, and it actually goes onto the front of the camera that way. And what that does, apart from actually giving you sometimes a slightly better image because it handles certain types of chromatic aberration by doing that, you also get much closer to your subject, ridiculously close. I mean, you know, like millimeters away. Oh, thank you, Eves. Thank you. So Eves has I must have missed a coffee fund contribution earlier on because I've just seen the total. I'm confused. Anyway, whoever Brian, thank you. Maybe I'm getting it on a delay actually. Thank you to both of you for your contribution to the coffee fund. That is much appreciated. And you're welcome, Sharif. I thought I read that right. Okay, so that's macro lenses and not using macro lenses, as the case may be. I do want to find those shots of the 500 PF for you, but I might have to do that when because they're in somewhere in my folders, so I will find those for you in a minute. Now, there's a problem, I would say, with using natural light for macro. That I love to use natural light, and if you watched the stream on Thursday or you watched the edited version, Joe McNally talked about how people pick up a flash and then they get kind of freaked out by it because they get, you know, disappointing results, and then they become a natural light photographer. I was one of those people. That definitely rang true for me. But I do use flash in very small quantities. Nikon produced a macro flash called the SBR1C1, which I mentioned also the other day. What that consists of, and this is This has actually got a flash on the front of it. But it consists of a ring that goes around the front of your lens, and then it has two flashes, two remote flashes, and then you either fire them using a commander on the hot shoe or using your built-in flash if your camera is compatible. The two remote flashes are called SBR200s, and you can actually add up to 4 more to that ring, although it does become very top heavy. The guys at the Nikon school way back when used to talk about using the SBR1C1 almost as like a ring light for portraiture, and I used it a lot for that. It was great. But it's very, very helpful if you are doing close-up photography. Now, the struggle that a lot of people have when they're doing natural light macro, if you want a nice wide depth of field, so you want to get the whole flower in focus, for example, you end up running out of light in natural light situations. And obviously some cameras deal with it better than others. You can bump the ISO up and it's not the end of the world, or you can post-process and edit and handle it that way. But if you have a flash, it allows you to have a lot more control over your shutter speed and your aperture, so you can have them as fast and as small as you like while still throwing out a whole bunch of light, which is great. Oh my goodness, thank you, Simon. That's amazing. That's like a whole tray of donuts. Actually, depends on the donuts, but it is. Thank you so much. That's brilliant. Oh, there's a couple of comments on manual focus lenses. Old 55s, yeah. I'll talk about the 55, Sam. That's a good point. I don't have one anymore. I sold it. It was ridiculous. Why did I do that? Had an old 55 3.5 AI, and they did a pre-AI version, and then they did a 2.8 AIS version. Fantastic lens. Not one-to-one reproduction. You had to stick an extension tube on the back called a PK13. But if you can pick up one of those old 55s, they also did an autofocus version, very briefly. Also produced fantastic results, but that was then replaced out by the 60. So with the 55, I've actually found a lot of the guys who do stop motion animation, they use those. So Leica and Aardman and the Aardman and the Wallace and Gromit people. Leica did Paranorman and a couple of others, and the Wes Anderson company that did Isle of Dogs. Those guys, they tend to use 55 mils just because they use manual focus lenses for the consistency of color in their films, but also because with Nikon glass, from pretty much one batch of lenses to another, you will get a consistent result. And if you've got 15, 20 cameras that all have to have the same lens on them, then the Nikon manual focus lenses are tested to be the best ones. So anyway, bit of nerdery for you there. All right, so before I forget what I'm talking about, lighting, thank you. So I did a couple of tests. Is that YouTube having a problem again? Okay, so full disclosure, on Thursday there was a combination of problems, not just my computer, but also YouTube for some reason was having a little bit of a problem. So hopefully you're not getting, I think that it's getting a bit stuttery again. It's YouTube's fault. Let me know if you can hear me okay though, because it's definitely, my internet is working fine. So it might be YouTube having a problem. Okay, you're all having a problem. That's really annoying. It's not my computer, it's YouTube. It's just flashed up a big fat error. So if you can hear me okay, then I can show you screenshots and then you don't have to see me stuttering. Basically, we'll see how we go. So I wanted to show you some different examples of using the flash, no flash, LED, etc., which I will do now. If you bear with me a moment, let me just flip over to my screen grab. Here we go. Now you can see what I see. This was the shot from Trevor. He must not be watching today, otherwise he probably would have answered me already. So here we have, oh yes, okay, so we've got some flash and some natural light. These are all examples using flowers, but you don't have to use flowers as an example. I'm just going to show you them. So this was just a cut rose that I bought from the supermarket, and this is shot at f3.5 with the 60mm lens, and you can see you've got a very shallow depth of field there, all natural light. I didn't do anything to the picture afterwards either. These are all straight out of the camera. Now if I wanted to use, for example, f16 So it's much smaller aperture. I don't generally shoot at an aperture that small, but you've got much, much more in focus at f16, and I had to use a flash. Now, what I did with this is I used Joe's principle of bouncing the flash behind the camera so that it wouldn't give you that harsh light. I did have a few examples of the flash straight onto the subject, but honestly, they weren't very pleasing. So, so we're not going to bother with those. But this was with the flash pointed behind me, so kind of over my shoulder at the wall behind, which just illuminated the scene enough that I could shoot at f16. Now, I was talking about depth of field and getting closer. Now, if you just look at what's in focus on this frame here, and then you have a look at the next shot, this is a much closer shot. It's not cropped. This is actually me getting in closer, and you can see even at f16, I've got a much shallower depth of field. So if you get in closer, you get a shallow depth of field. Further away, you get a wider depth of field. Now, someone asked me the other day during the flash stream that we did, why you would use flash over LEDs. Well, this is actually using LED. This is an LED panel that these are the ones that I use for my video. They're quite small panels. You can get higher quality LEDs. You can use like obviously super expensive ones like Rotolight and stuff, which are fantastic and professional level LEDs. Without having edited the photo, this was the quantity of light that I got from the LED versus, and this is exactly the same settings as the flash, right? But with an LED. So you can see even at full power, that was what I got. And then I edited it so that I could actually see something, which was handy. So there is a difference to how light reacts. And I'm going to show some of John Hughes, who is also a regular watcher. I'm going to show some of his pictures shortly that I snatched, because he uploaded them to the Drive folder, and they're great examples of still life. So here is, okay, not super inspiring, but just something I threw together. So we've got a jug, natural light, you can see the wall behind, it's not super pretty, and then same principle using flash. Okay, I could have actually directed it a little bit better so I didn't get a shadow here, but it just illuminated the picture a little bit more, and I could use a slightly smaller aperture. So it's kind of interesting what it gives you and the results that it shows you with flash versus LED versus natural lighting. That's not the picture that I want to show you. Let me flip over here and see if you can actually see me any better. I'm just trying to see if you... Sound is fine. Okay, good. Well, then at least I can just show you pictures. The plant is a rebus flowering currant. Yeah, sounds like flowering currant is the consensus. You flower boffins, you. It's wonderful. I thought that I had a good knowledge of flowers, but I don't in comparison to so many other people. Thank you, Andre. That's very kind. Despite my stuttering problems with YouTube, hopefully it's not going to be too bad. Maybe I'll try not to be so animated, and then you won't notice that the picture is taking a while to catch up. Okay, so quite a people I follow for macro flash use a homemade snoot. Ah, good. 60mm 2.8D must be best value. Yeah, exactly. So Marco, I actually used to have a 60D before I had this one. The 60D is much cheaper. And honestly, if you've got a camera with a motor inside, then use that, because it's a fantastic lens. This is just the next step up if you want it. And it has the nano crystal coat, which is very helpful as well. All right, just what I mean with the 7200 by itself, it can focus down to 1 meter. If you add the TC 1.4, you get 280. So yes, of course, Ed, sorry, that way round. Yeah, so you could be at the same distance as you were without the teleconverter. It just gets you closer. It's a very good point. What's the SM1? You're gonna have to clarify that one for me. The SM1. Maybe I need to Google it. All right, so that's using flash and using LEDs and natural lighting. Now I wanted to talk about focus stacking. I've already done a whole stream on it, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. But just what you can do if you're struggling with getting all of your subject in focus. You don't have flash, or you don't want to use flash, and you want to shoot at smaller apertures. You want to get the whole subject in focus, but you don't want to use f32, or your lens doesn't shoot at f32 is another point, then you can use focus stacking. Focus stacking is where the camera takes a sequence of images either for you, like with the D850 and the Z cameras, or you take them yourself at different focusing distances, so different distances between you and the subject, and then you squish them all together in something like Helicon Focus or Photoshop, and then it produces an image which is completely in focus. I'm going to show you some examples from friend of the show, Nick Harrison, who was very, very kind and uploaded a whole bunch of close-ups for me. Not all of them are done with focus stacking. There's like a combination of the two, but he's done a huge amount. Oh, sorry, SBR1C1. Okay, so the SSSM1 is the name of the case that the SBR1C1 goes into. Just so you know, I was like, that's a flash case, but I don't know what it holds. Yeah, that's the SBR1C1 case. So yes, I should do a stream on the SBR1C1, and I will see if we've got one when I go to the shop next, and one that I can actually play with before I do that. It's a really good point. Thank you, Terry. Thank you so much. I love the corgi. I think it's a corgi or a dog. Thank you for that. All right, so I wanted to show you some pictures using focus stacking. Now let's just see if, I think I've got the drive folder. Yes, I've got it open here. So I'm going to show you Nick's pictures. Let me swap over. Now Nick could probably tell me quite quickly which ones are taken with focus stacking and which ones aren't. But there were some which I just happened to kind of look at before and know that they were taken with and without stacking. Some of them are handheld. Go through these afterwards as you wish. I'm just going to show you some that really kind of make the point. This one was quite interesting. I asked Nick what he used for this one. And he said this was an early shot put together in Photoshop before Helicon Focus. 17 shots stitched together from the Z6 and 105 macro. So it's kind of this is a dandelion, and you can access these in your garden most likely if you're like me and have them all over your garden, or you can get very easy access to dandelions and dandelion clocks, and they are fantastic subjects, really brilliant subjects for this kind of photography where you're doing flower portraiture or you're doing a little bit of still life. Now this dandelion clock here, actually Nick didn't tell me whether or not this was a stacked image. It might well not be, because I've got a similar image of my own. It's just on a different hard drive, so I couldn't access it. And it was handheld. This was taken with the 105 macro as well. And I love the fact that, first of all, there's like one of little seedlings coming out of the dandelion clock, which just makes it that little bit more interesting, but also just the amount of these things that are in focus is quite incredible. So there's quite a lot of shots on here done both with, this is without stacking, I'm assuming, because you can see the depth of field is super shallow on that one. And Nick has done quite a lot of stacking with these images. So if you get a chance, this is in our drive folder, and he's put it under a folder called Nick H Close-Ups. So there you go. Clues in the name. Here's a few forget-me-nots and camellias and things like that. And then this one is one that's not taken with focus stacking. And you can see that the portion of the subject that's in focus is this tiny little tip here with a little spider web on it. So you can get very creative about how you want to take pictures of plants, and whether or not you want to use focus stacking, whether you want to use a smaller aperture, if you want to use flash or natural lighting. There's plenty to experiment. Now, I want to show you a chap who is a Nikon ambassador. His name is Joey Terrell. He takes these great videos. He's a Nikon USA ambassador, so he's an American chap, and he takes these very interesting abstract shots. If you look at his CV, and this is like a really tiny selection of it, he's worked with so many different big names in the photographic industry, but his abstract shots, and I'll show you this one slightly larger, it's simple things like mirrors and colored paper, kitchen utensils, and just using colored gels, which is what you add to your flashes, just in case you don't know. I can talk about that a little bit if anyone needs to know. Colored paper and dewdrops and things like that. He does put videos of how he sets up these shots, both in his Instagram and also on his stories. So if you're interested, then please do check those out. But as I say, his name is Joey Terrell. He does super close stuff. These are, things like springs and coins. This one down here is a whisk. It's quite literally a kitchen whisk. So you can go around your kitchen, and this was a very interesting video. He was finding things and looking at them through a loop to see what he wanted to take pictures of. So this one was a kitchen sieve, which he just lit and had a different coloured background. It's very, very easy when you have someone inspirational like this just to stay super productive and find things everywhere to take pictures of. So you don't have to go too far afield if you want to do shots like this. And if whether you're using flash or not, you can get quite experimental about it. And you don't just have to do flowers, because I didn't want to just talk about flowers. A lot of the pictures that I have are flowers, but it doesn't mean that you have to do that. So Joey is a very good example. Another person who's a fantastic example is John Hughes. As I say, friend of the show. I think I've got all his shots up here. This was his setup for this shot, which again provided his own background there, and then shot it using this kind of ring light. John, you're gonna have to tell me what ring light that is. Is it I feel like I should know, but I'm not sure which one it is, so you can put in the specs which one. So he also sent me a few other pictures of different setups, but they're on my work computer and not on the computer at home. But I just wanted to show you some simple examples using reflective surfaces as well of some still life. So it doesn't just have to be flowers. You can get creative and use glasses of cherries, or in my case, a jug full of dead plants, because I quite like the colours in that shot. This is a shot that John took. This was actually focus stacked. He pointed out, and this one's in the drive folder. So if you want to look at the specs, it's in the main drive folder, and you can have a look at what settings he used for that one. But chess set is a great example. There was another set of shots that I wanted to show you. So as you may or may not know, and I'm sure I've mentioned it about 1 million times before, at least 1 million, I have an Instagram account for my photography, and then I have a separate one for my book reviews and book writing, and because I'm a complete book nerd, it's just something that I enjoy doing. Bookstagram, as it's called by the people that do books on Instagram, has its own kind of rules of aesthetic and how you display your books and things to make it interesting for people. So I do a lot of the still life that I do tends to have books in it. So I thought I would just show you just a small selection of using elements from around the house. I don't go out my way to buy props. I know a lot of people on Bookstagram do, and I always really admire their dedication to it, but I tend to just find things that are in my house to do these shots. They look much more pleasing when they're on an Instagram feed, but I'm just going to show you out of interest, because then you can see the pictures quite big. So all of these are obviously shot on Nikon. I very rarely use my phone for these kind of shots, so using colors and elements that I like, and kind of combining book titles with things outside. Like, for example, in the book community, you have candles that go along with characters from books, believe it or not. I use my rabbits as props, and teacups and things. This is another shot that was reasonably popular. Now, interesting enough, just to show you, this was taken, as I put in the notes there, 55 1.2. This was with the Z6 and the 24-70. This was with the 35 1.4, which is a lens I use an awful lot for my book stuff. This is another setup that I did, which is also the 35 1.4. And then this is another Z6 24-70 shot. And lastly, this is the Z50 with the 16-50. So you don't really need a macro lens for any of this kind of stuff at all. It's great if you've got one, but it's not essential. And by any means, you could use a kit lens, you can use a telephoto lens, you can pretty much use what you like. So, you know, just get creative and get much closer to the subject. The key thing is getting as close to the subject as possible. That is the tricky thing. If you can get close to the subject, then you can really make it look quite amazing with your shallow depth of field. Now let me just find the comments. Oh, look. She's been busy. Oh, thank you, David. Thank you for your contribution to the Coffee Fund. So Nick has now put comments on the things that I was pointing out. So the fern wasn't focus stacked. Yes, I spotted that one. Focus stacking eliminates the issue of diffraction caused by smaller aperture. Yeah, I was going to talk about diffraction. Now, the thing is that some people don't notice diffraction, and I've talked about it a lot in some of my earlier streams. Diffraction is caused when the aperture is so small that when the light hits it, it hits the edge of an aperture blade and it actually splits, which means that you end up with a slightly not sharp picture. So if you're ever shooting on, usually noticeable on higher resolution cameras more than lower resolution cameras, but if you're ever shooting on a D800 series or a D850 and you shoot at a small aperture, you will notice perhaps shooting at f16 or f22 or something like that, that you end up with a less than optimally sharp image, which you'd think is strange because you're shooting at a small aperture. Actually, it's because the light hits the aperture blades, it splits, and then it ends up giving you this kind of slightly blurry image. So hence, you might want to use focus stacking instead of using a very tiny aperture. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know. Now I've got an excellent connection, so I'm really not sure what's going on. YouTube's taken down its little alert notice, but hopefully my mouth will catch up with my sound at some point soon. It's an Ellen Crom. Thank you, John. So for John's setup, I showed you the tulips with the ring light around the front of the lens. That was an Ellen Crom for anyone that wanted to know. There are a few Terry T tutorials on the Nikon website. There's quite a lot of free stuff on the Nikon website at the moment, and also a lot of professional photographers are really going out of their way to provide free courses for people, so it's worth taking advantage of those. I use Instagram as my kind of main platform for photography, but other people will use Facebook, or they'll use their own website, or they'll use their blogs or whatever. So, you know, everybody is different, but whatever social media platform you use, do have a look at your favorite photographers, see if they're up there, because you may find that they've got some hidden gems, that little bits of information that you wouldn't otherwise have learned. So I've showed you through all of those. I showed you Joey, I showed you John. John's got quite a lot of pictures in the drive folder as well, so feel free to have a look at those. He's also been kind enough to put all the specs of the pictures there, so if you're curious as to how he got certain shots, then that's also something that you can have a look at. I will just double check I haven't missed anyone's questions. Yeah, Andy is talking about the SBR1C1. I did talk about it the other day, and I didn't want to repeat myself. But yes, I'll try and do a stream on the SBR1C1. There's two kits, the R1 and the R1C1. The C1 just has the SU800 in it. The R1 doesn't. So if you don't have a camera with a flash in it that controls other flashes, you will need the full kit with the Commander. If you've got a camera that has a built-in flash that will fire other flashes, then you can get the SBR1. You don't need the Commander. All right. Does anyone know why the PK13 doesn't work on the FTZ adapter? So it depends on what you mean by doesn't work. It is a fully mechanical piece of kit, but essentially the lens that you put on there is going to make all the difference. If the FTZ is not able to see the aperture reading from your lens, then that may be why you're having a problem. It will probably just give you an F dash, just like it does with any manual focus lens. So shouldn't make any difference to whether or not you're using a manual lens or not. It's the same with AFD lenses. You just won't get autofocus because there's no CPU chip there. When close-up focus stacking may produce zoom breathing. Okay, yeah, so you do get focus breathing with certain lenses. Unfortunately, there's no advice aside from looking at the recommended lenses for focus stacking. And also, if you don't have, so if you've got a camera that automatically focus stacks, then when it's producing those images, it shifts the focus in such a way that you don't need to move the camera as well. If you're doing it all manually, then you will also need to move the camera at certain increments using a focusing rail and taking your shots while adjusting focusing, so that you kind of counteract the focus breathing, zoom breathing issue. Hopefully that makes sense, Drazen. AFD, yes. So with AFD lenses, because the PK13 has no contact in it whatsoever, you now need to use your AFD lens as a manual lens. So you need to unlock the aperture ring and just use it as if it were a manual lens, because the PK13 doesn't transfer any information to the Z cameras. Yeah, I'm sorry, Michael. I know the picture is... actually, on my side, the picture is looking fine, but... I don't know what its problem is. YouTube, on Thursday, I spoke to a few guys who do streaming and they all had the same problem as I did. So it wasn't just me. But hopefully the fact that you can hear me is sufficient. And then if I'm pulling strange faces, just blame it on YouTube. That is pretty much everything I wanted to talk about on the subject of still life and portraiture. I am free to answer questions. I wanted to show you Simon's pictures taking the 500 PF, which I will find for you right now. But unfortunately, you will have to see me being a little bit stuttered. You tried that, but are you not getting... So, Mr. Hookshanks. So you've got your AFD lens, you've got your PK13, and are you saying that you're not getting a what you see is what you get image on your monitor? You might want to email me. If you email me at my Grays Westminster email address, I will see if I can troubleshoot it for you, because maybe other people are not having the problem and maybe it's just us and we need to solve the problem for you. Who knows? So we'll try and figure it out, but it's very difficult to troubleshoot it on a live stream when I don't actually have the equipment in front of me. Some people are saying the picture is fine, so this is also a wonderful thing. Adapter does stop electronic functions. Also, don't use an extension tube for a 35 lens or lower. It can't focus. Yes, that is a good point. It depends on what lens you're using. There are all kinds of reasons why black no image, and you're using it at the widest aperture. We are definitely going to talk about this after the stream, because I'm pretty much done and I don't want to leave any people wondering what on earth we're talking about. So we'll do that. That is everything on the subject of still life. So everything that I'm going to cover today. So it doesn't matter what lens you use, just get as close to your subject as possible, whether you've got a zoom or a prime lens. Experiment with natural lighting and also with flash. Now, if you want to use a smaller aperture, you can either do focus stacking to get everything in focus, or you can use flash to counteract the fact that you're using a very small aperture. If you've got a high resolution camera, probably best not to use a very small aperture because you may suffer from diffraction. The pictures that I took that were shot at f16 were all taken on my D850. If I was blowing up to 100%, you'd probably see a bit of diffraction, but you couldn't necessarily tell from those shots that I showed you then and there. They were unedited and straight out of the camera. In terms of focus stacking, there's Photoshop, Helicon, there's a couple of others that I talked about. I did a whole stream on that a couple of weeks ago. So if you're interested in focus stacking, then have a look at that live stream. It's up on our channel there. And lastly, just get creative. Find things that maybe are not conventionally photographed. Take a little leaf out of Joey Terrell's book and take some pictures of sieves. Generate your own backgrounds. Experiment with taking stuff outside or having stuff outside at a safe distance in your garden if need be, or on the balcony or whatever. But do experiment with your backgrounds as well, because if you use, as John's pictures testify, if you use different coloured backgrounds, you can produce an entirely different dynamic to your picture. Sharif asked, could I clarify which lens mounts are compatible, I'm guessing, with the FTZ? That's fine, Sharif, I understood. So the FTZ will work with any F-mount lens at all, but you will not get autofocus unless you've got an AFS lens. AFS or AFP, there's a handful of AFP lenses. If you've got a lens which doesn't have a motor in it, then you will get manual focus. If you've got a manual focus lens, then it will just be manual focus. There's no transfer of information from a manual focus lens to the camera. So you have to tell the camera what the aperture is and what the focal length is in order for your EXIF data to actually show something up. But it won't record your aperture. So you'll get an F dash in the viewfinder on a Z camera. Pretty sure I did a video on that as well. If my partner in crime can find it, something to do with using Z cameras and manual focus lenses. It was a few months ago now, but it's up on our YouTube channel, so you can also find that. There you go. John, I knew that John used it very tiny apertures. So John shoots at f29 and above. I've seen some of his pictures, and doesn't seem to have an issue with diffraction, which is quite amazing. I think it also depends on the subject and where the light is coming from, actually, because obviously diffraction is a light created problem. It's not it's not because the lens is going to do that. It's because when the light hits the aperture corner of the aperture blades, it does that. So I think that's probably what it's down to. But yeah, John uses very small apertures as well as focus stacking. So you can use a combination of the two. Please feel free to have an experiment with these. Do upload your results to the Drive folder so that we can share in them. I love sharing your results. I think it's great to be able to share the community's pictures. Thank you everyone for your coffee fund contributions today as well. I'm still recovering from last week's stream of all the video and everything going horribly wrong. It doesn't look like it's fully sorted itself out. And apart from that, if you have any topics that you'd like me to cover, I will try and get my hands on an SBR1C1 for those that are interested. But anyone else that would like me to cover something in particular, drop me an email, pop a comment here. Yeah, if you shoot at f29, make sure your sensor's clean. Very good point. If you are shooting at smaller apertures, you will see dirt on your sensor. You will see everything, all the dirt. So make sure your sensor is nice and clean. That is it from me. I will see you again on Thursday. So same time, all being well. And as I say, send me your questions, etc. I answer my emails as regularly as I possibly can. So you can comment on the videos or you can send me to my Grace Westminster email address. It's lovely having you all with me on these afternoons. And I hope you have a good rest of your day and a good Wednesday. I will see you on Thursday. Thanks very much, everyone.